So let's get started. When you are first picking up all of your calligraphy equipment, there's a few little things that you need to do to prepare. So the first and most important thing is that your nib will be provided with a protective coating on it. When you have the protective coating on it, if you don't remove it, the ink won't adhere to the nib. So if you can see here, it just doesn't quite work. So we need to remove that protective coating. There's a few ways of doing it. You can use a flame. So if you just use like a candle flame or a lighter and just wave it in it, then that can remove the coating, and then rub it afterwards. You can stick it in a potato, which seems a bit strange, but if you stick your nib in a potato for an hour or so, that can also remove the coating. Give it a rub afterwards. And then the other way that you can do it is you can use your spit. So you can spit on your nib, lovely, and give it a good wipe, and then just keep trying to dip it in the nib until it comes out like this. Okay, and when the ink is nicely covering the front of your nib, then that is when you know that you've got it all cleaned off. So that's sorted. So you can see that I've dipped so that the G on the Zebra G nib is still clean. So that's about where you need to be dipping your nib to into your ink. So that's something that's really important. Now, something that I've got behind my nib, which you can also purchase, is a tiny little spring with a magnet on it, and this is called a One Dip Wonder. This is from Tom's Studio, which is the same place as I got my pen holder from. And what it does is it allows you to not have to dip quite as often. So I really like using this when I've got longer commissions to do. So I've just written a poem for somebody, and it just means that I don't have to dip it in quite as often, and that saves some time for me. So that might be something that you'd be interested in purchasing at some point if you feel like it. They're not massively expensive. But yeah, so they're great. So that's something that I've got as an extra piece of equipment that you might find useful. So you're just dipping the nib until you cover the hole, and that's really, really important. Okay, so we also need to talk about your hand position and your body position, because both of those things have quite an impact on your success in writing calligraphy. So when you are holding your nib, and I'll get the Louise Creations nib as well, so pen holder as well, so you can see both. When you're holding your pen, you just need to make sure that you're as comfortable as you can possibly be. Now, you're not holding. So sometimes when we're writing, we might write quite upright. Okay, so we need to be careful that you're not writing upright. Okay, you're more at an angle, roughly a 45-degree angle from the paper. So that's the first thing that's really, really important. So we're not writing up too high. We are just at a nice angle. Okay, you need to make sure that the vent hole, which is the hole in the middle of the nib, is pointing directly upwards. Sometimes there's a temptation when we're writing for our nib to roll, our hand to roll slightly, so that the nib goes slightly sideways. So just make sure that that vent hole is at the top. So that's really, really important. So a nice shallow angle to the paper, vent hole sticking upwards, and then you'll notice at this point, if you press quite hard, hopefully you can see there, the tines open. Okay, so that is what you're aiming to do. Every time your tines open, you will release more ink. So when you're doing a downstroke, you will see that they open. When you're doing an upstroke, you need to be very, 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 very feather light. Okay, so that gives you an idea. So down, open the tines, up, the tines don't open, and they give you a really nice, lovely, thin stroke. So we've spoken about dipping just past the ink hole. Don't go any further than that. And if you are, so when you dip, some people might be a little bit heavy-handed. So everybody, when they dip their ink, should just scrape the bottom, the top edge of it. Some people might find that they need to scrape the bottom as well, and that just takes the excess ink off. You'll find if you've got too much ink on your nib, it will all gush out at the start and you'll just get a blob. But just so you know, everybody blobs their ink to start with, so don't feel that you're really failing if that happens to you. So just as a quick reminder, we've got a nice shallow angle to the paper, about 45 degrees. We've got the vent hole sticking upwards. We've got the ink dipped just as far as the G and no further, because you don't want to get it all over your hand and everywhere. It's just quite a sticky mess. And you're pressing down really hard for the down strokes and really, really, really feather light for your up strokes. And that's how you're getting all the different parts right. Okay, so body position and paper position is really, really important. So you need to be facing forwards. Don't be tempted to turn your body at all, because all that will happen is you'll end up with a really bad back and you won't be able to enjoy your calligraphy as much. So make sure that your feet are firmly planted on the floor, that your back is nice and upright, and that you're facing directly to the table. And then instead of moving your body to make your calligraphy work, you're going to move your paper. So if you are right-handed, you'll be turning your paper about 45 degrees to anti-clockwise. If you are left-handed, you will turn your paper clockwise. Now, if you are left-handed, you have a few different options here. So this bit is quite important for those people. So first of all, you may choose to, as I mentioned in the video before, to use a straight pen holder, and that can sometimes help you a little bit with angle. The other thing is, if you are somebody who writes over the top, you really can't write like that, unfortunately. So you will have to learn to write underneath. You do need to underwrite with calligraphy, because otherwise, if you're doing it this way, you're basically going to be doing backwards writing and it just wouldn't work at all. I found that left-handed people sometimes, because they already angle their paper quite a bit so that they can get the right angle naturally, you may feel that you need to angle it even more. So from previous left-handed students have mentioned that some of them have actually had to go as far as 90 degrees to the paper and essentially be writing towards themselves for it to work. So if you are left-handed and you're at this stage, just have a little bit of a play with how far you need to go round, whether you need to have the flange on your pen holder or not, and again, that's whether you feel comfortable or not. And yeah, just make sure that you've got to a position where you are able to write comfortably. And the most important thing, if I just show you on a page, on one of the main pages, is that your nib, and this is for everybody actually, your nib needs to be running parallel to the dotted lines on your worksheets. Okay, and that's what gives you the right angle to do your writing. So make sure that your nib is facing parallel to those dotted lines. So if you use that as a basis, that will help you, left-handed or right-handed, to decide how far round you need to go. Okay, if you do have any more questions about left-handed writing and you're not 100% sure, please get in touch with me. And there are also some left-handed calligraphers in my Learning Modern Calligraphy group who might be able to give you a bit more information as well. So, you know, do speak up. That's something I'm happy to help you with. Okay, so let's get started with our basic strokes. So we've done all of the things that I've mentioned. So we've made sure we've dipped our ink not too far. We have there we go, scraped on the top and for me I do it on the bottom as well because I am a little bit heavy-handed when writing. And we are sitting with either our paper anti-clockwise if we're right-handed, clockwise if we're left-handed, and we are placing our nib perfectly in parallel to the lines. Okay, and this is really important because this pen is not going to like working on a funny angle. Okay, you have to make sure that when you're doing your downstrokes, you are parallel to the line, and when you're doing your upstrokes, you're also parallel to the line, and that helps you out a lot. So just keep an eye as I'm going on my hand position. So remembering that the ink hole needs to be facing upwards to the ceiling, and just keep an eye on on the way that I'm holding my pen and the way that my angles are, and that should help you as we go along. The other thing that's important to mention is that you should be writing so that your forearm, so this part of your arm here, is resting about here on the edge of the table. If you've got your elbow on, it can restrict your movement. So about here on the table. And what that does mean is that you need to move your paper up rather than moving your hand down as you're going down the page. So just keep remembering to do that. It's quite difficult to remember sometimes, actually, and occasionally I get that wrong and I forget to move the paper up, and then I find myself writing really uncomfortably at the bottom. So these are all things to help you get yourself into good habits. And speaking of good habits, doing the basic strokes before you do absolutely anything else is the best way to become really good at calligraphy pretty quickly. So these basic strokes are the most important thing. Each of these strokes, they give you the very first sort of tools to help you to turn what you think is writing into actually into art. And one of the things that is really helpful at this stage is to remind you that calligraphy is not writing, and the sooner you kind of get that kind of vision in your head, the easier you'll find it. It is drawing shapes that look like letters and words. So if you remember that and you focus on these basic shapes and you think about the basic shapes while you are writing each letter, you will find it a lot easier to remove those sort of writing habits, because we've all been writing since we were very young, so they are habits now, and some of those habits we need to unlearn slightly in order to be successful at calligraphy. So dipping our nib and let's get started. Okay, so the first very basic is the downstroke. So I am doing some really nice slow downstrokes. Now it's really important as you're going along that you're really looking at the speed at which I'm doing this. It's very easy to go too quickly. Okay, so just really nice and slowly. Now I've got this one dip wonder thing on the back of my nib. So my ink is lasting a lot longer than it would normally, but I will take it off in a second and you'll see what happens when it's not there. Okay, and this will give you an idea about when your ink is running out. So let me try it without. There we go. Okay, so I've dipped and I've scraped top and bottom. Let's go back to the paper again. So you can see my nib is still facing upwards and it's still parallel to those lines. Okay, so pressing down fairly hard. Now I think, because I'm starting to see my air hole empty, that my nib is going to stop soon. There you go. So that is what happens when you run out of ink. You need to aim to try not to let this happen. So just keep an eye, and I think over time it becomes a bit more instinctive of how long you think you've got left of doing lines. And if this does happen, it really doesn't matter. And goodness me, you're at the very beginning anyway, so it really doesn't matter at all, you're learning. But if it does happen, You can go back and fill that in, of course. It's just not as easy to do. So avoiding it is better than making it happen. However, like I said, you are learning, so don't worry too much. So really nice and gently and slowly, but you're pressing down quite hard. And don't be afraid to really press down at this stage. So the harder you press, the thicker the line is going to be. And don't be afraid of doing that. This is all about experimenting and seeing what this nib can do. You won't break it. And you'll be surprised at how hard you actually need to press. Now, as I said, there are some other nibs out there that are even more flexible than this one that you can use. Okay, so we've done that one. Let's go on to our basic upstrokes. So I've slightly moved my paper up, just slightly, so that I've still got my arm really nicely and comfortably on the desk. I'm still facing forwards. And I'm trying to keep my back straight. You really don't need to crouch over your paper, and if you're doing quite a bit of practice, that's not good for you. So very nice and slowly to start with these upstrokes. You do need to be really, really gentle and light with these. Again, my nib is parallel to the paper I'm going along. You might find that to begin with, these upstrokes might be a little bit wibbly wobbly, and that's okay. The reason mine aren't as wibbly wobbly is because I've been doing calligraphy for a while, and therefore my hand has learnt some muscle memory. Muscle memory has an absolutely huge factor in being able to do calligraphy. It's a bit like riding a bike, really. Once you know how to do it, it'll stay, because your hand is using muscles in a certain way, and then your body is remembering how they're used. So as time goes on, the more you practice, the less wibbly it'll get. Just a short, small warning though, there are some things that can make your calligraphy a little bit more wibbly. One of those is coffee. So if you drink a lot of coffee, you might find that your hand gets a little bit shaky, and I have that problem. I can't really drink real coffee when I'm doing calligraphy. I can get away with 1 and sometimes 2 instant coffees, but as soon as I touch the real stuff, I can't write. So therefore, that's one thing. Obviously wine and other such drinks can make it a bit wibbly as well, so maybe think about how many you're having while you're doing your calligraphy, and also your hand position, and if you're holding on too tight, that can also just not quite help your range of movement, and that's another thing that can make your writing a little bit wobbly, so that's something to bear in mind. Okay, so we've done our nice thick down strokes, and we've done some really nice light basic upstrokes as well. And this stroke is actually the connecting stroke, so you will use this quite a lot when you're connecting one letter to the next to make words. Okay, so moving slightly up, and we're going to go on to some of the more complex strokes now. So still having that right angle, that good angle on our paper, and remembering left-handed this way, and changing your hand angle so that you underwrite rather than overwriting. Okay, so your basic overturn stroke. So for this one, you're going to go really lightly at the top, up to the top, and then just after you've gone over the hill, so you've got to go over first, just after you've gone over, that's when you start pressing down a little bit harder to get your nice thick down stroke. So up really gently, really gently. Oh dear, look, my ink didn't flow. That sometimes happens. Sometimes you just need to press down slightly to start it flowing. And then it works. Right, nice and gentle, and then heavy on the way down. And you can see that the upstroke and the downstroke at the ends are pretty parallel. So that's what you're aiming for, to get it nice and parallel by the time you get back to the bottom again. Okay, nice and light, and then press after the corner and over. Nice and light and press after the corner. So wait until you've gone round the corner before you press down. Now you're aiming for consistency with these, so aiming for them to be as consistent as possible. I mean, that one isn't quite as consistent as the rest, so that's not great, but hey, we're all human. But yeah, so aiming for as much consistency as possible. Right, so I'm looking at these and I'm thinking, actually that one I'm quite pleased with, so I'm going to give myself a little tick. It's always nice to feel good about what you're doing. What's really important is to keep referring back to the original ones at the start, or looking back at the video to really establish what is a good overturn stroke, and then the rest of the strokes as well. Don't keep doing the same thing incorrectly. Really analyse how much does mine look like the original, and how can I make it, you know, what's right, what's wrong, how can I make it even better. And that's a really, really important aspect of, well, I suppose learning any skill, but for calligraphy, just to try and get your strokes as close to the basic strokes that I'm teaching you, and then you'll find it a lot easier. Okay, so basic underturn stroke, so heavy, and then we ease off before we get to the bottom, and then back up again. So this one we're heavy and then we're easing off at the bottom, which is very different to the first one, and can be quite difficult. Some people find this easier, other people find it harder, but try not to have too sudden a switch from thick to thin. You've got to try and make it gradual rather than quick and sudden. Okay, so again we're aiming for a parallel two lines as close as possible. We won't be perfect at this stage, but there you go, that's not too bad. And equally you're also aiming for the lines to be roughly parallel with the dotted lines on your worksheet. That's something that's good to bear in mind, and that might help you as well. So I quite like that one, quite pleased with that one. Give yourself a tick if you're happy with any of yours. Okay, make sure that you're pushing your paper up again, and then we'll do the compound curve, which is a combination of two, which is not as easy as when you're just doing one. So I'll talk you through that one. Make sure you're dipping. Actually, I think maybe now that we've got to this stage, I think you can dip and clean your nib a little, some water, and then the cloth. And what happens is, because this particular ink, but it happens with other inks for different reasons too, because this ink is carbon based, when it dries it can leave a bit of a residue on your nib, which can make it just not quite as nice to write with, a bit rough. So make sure you do keep cleaning it every sort of 5 minutes or so. Okay, so for this one we're doing the overturn, so really nice and gently on the way up, press hard and then ease off and then back up again. I'm not so happy with that one. Let's see if we can do another one a bit better. Okay, ease off. There we go. And this time you're aiming for 3 parallels, which is easier said than done, but just do your best. There you go. I think one important thing to note here is how slowly I'm going. It's very tempting because life is just so busy. It's very tempting for us to go too quickly on this, but it's really, really important that you think very carefully about your speed, because the faster you go, the ink won't flow properly, you'll get blobs of ink here, there and everywhere, and you just won't be able to get the same level of control. So you have to really, really force yourselves to slow down, which is lovely. And this is part of the reason why calligraphy is so relaxing, because you're having to have a level of concentration that's not too arduous, but it's forcing you to slow down. And you can ask any calligrapher that the mental health benefits to doing calligraphy are huge. So this is the C shape. I love the C shape, I think it's really lovely. It's also used in a lot of letters. So I've not really explained so far where all these can be used, and I'll go back and do that before I move on to the second sheet. So, so yeah, the C shape is obviously a C shape, so use it for the C, but you would also use it for the D, and you would use it for the Q, and you would use it for, to an extent, well, for the A definitely, to an extent for an E. So an E is sort of part of and a G as well. So it's used quite a lot, and it's really important that we get this right. One of the very important parts of the C shape is that although it's a C, it's also a shape, and it's really important that the shape that we use is suitable for other letters. So, for example, the first things first, when you go, so for the top part, so when you go up and over, you need to start about 1/3 of the way down, go all the way around, and then 1/3 of the way back up. So it's kind of almost like an oval with a gap. If you treat it like an oval with a gap, it's a little bit easier to get the shape right. Okay, so gently over, heavier, and then lighter, and then back up again. And the reason you need to do it like an oval with a gap is that when you then turn this into a letter by adding a basic underturn to turn it into a letter A, you will be able to connect them together really nicely. If you do it like this, which is how you might think a C shape would be, when you go to do your other stroke, it just doesn't look quite as elegant as this does. Okay, so it's really important that you try and really almost close the gap for a C shape. There you go. Okay, so about 1/3 of the way down, round and back up again. And I'll do it again, 1/3 of the way round and then back up again. So you're just leaving a small gap there. So so keep practicing those ones. They're quite tricky to do, but I think they also look really lovely once you've got there with it. So so in terms of where these are used, I've already mentioned that the connecting strokes will be used between most letters. So having a nice light connecting stroke is really important. The overturn is used with an H, and then an N and an M, and sort of a Z, although it's a slightly wonky overturn. I can explain that when we get to learning a Z. And then the underturn is used for U's and Y's and I's, and a bit of the end of the letter L as well, so that's for the underturn stroke. The compound curve is used for M's and N's, basically, and they are a little bit difficult to do to start with, as I said. But again, it's easy to make them really nice and elegant once you get going. So yeah, so that's how all of those ones are used. And then I've said about the C shape for like the G's and the D's and the E's and the A's and the C's and all sorts of ones. So this one is used a lot. So really practice that one as much as you can. Okay. Now you'll see for each of these, we've used some guidelines. These guidelines are specific to modern calligraphy, and the dotted lines are there to help you to get the slant right. So bearing in mind these are the basic strokes for basic modern calligraphy, where the slant would be, I think it's 55 degrees, and as you get more proficient and later on in the course, I will teach you how to change your slant to adjust the style of your writing. So we're learning the basic at the moment, and then over time we might be able to try a different slant to make it look different. So this area here is called the X height, and then this is the ascending line area and the descending area. So when you do letters like your G's and H's and you're going above and below, that's where you will be going higher up. Okay, so letters, the bowls of letters are generally done within that area. Okay, let's get cracking with Okay, let's get started with the second sheet of basic strokes. So for this one, it's a backward C shape, so it's exactly the same as the forward C shape, but back to front. And this is for B's and P's. So it's used relatively often. We start a third of the way from the top, heavy down the back and back up again. So remember, it's like an oval with a bit of a gap in the middle, and you need to just make sure as best you can that you're sticking to that lovely angle where the dotted lines are. And that just helps you keep it really nice and neat. So keep aiming for that. And one thing that's really important when you are writing in calligraphy is to forget the speed at which you normally write. So it's not at all the same. The slower you go, the more time you can spend on finely tuning where your nib's going to go, and the more controlled and neat your calligraphy will be. So what you're aiming for, where possible, is for each of these to be exactly the same. Now they won't be perfectly the same, but the closer you can get to exactly the same, the better your calligraphy will be. Okay, so backward C shape, start 1/3 from the top, all the way around the back, heavy at the back, ease off, and then light up, a third way up from the bottom. Right, then we've got the ascending stem loop, so the first sort of longer stroke that we've got. So for this one, a lot of people end up going outwards and then back down, but actually you're going sort of up diagonally, and it's probably just a bit steeper than 45 degrees, really gently round the corner and back down along the dotted line. And I would recommend using the dotted line to help you on this one, to help you know where to go. That'll help you with the angle a little bit. So you're going up almost straight as in a diagonal over the top, and then pressing hard on the way down. Now, one thing that some people do on this one is they when they go up, they're fine, and when they go back down, they just don't go far enough to the left. And what that does is it means that it kind of cuts through your first lovely upstroke and just makes that loop look a little bit short, and it just doesn't look quite as elegant. So make sure that once you've gone over the top, you've gone up, you've gone over the top, and then when you come back down, just make sure that you're, where possible, just slightly to the left of the way you started your loop off. Okay, and that just finishes it off really nicely. Okay, so that's your ascending stem loop. Now we've got the L shape, which is very similar to the ascending stem loop, but it's just a little bit longer and a little bit curvier. So it's similar kind of principle, light at the top, light up to the top, press down when we get back down that back straight there, and then easing off, and there's just a slight curve in that L shape, which isn't massively easy to start with, but just do your best. Goodness, Rome wasn't built in a day, was it? The best thing you can do at this stage is just relax and enjoy it, because what would be the point of doing it if not? There we go. There we go. Keep going. There you go. So nice and gentle up to the top, heavy on the way down, and release before you get to the bottom. If you wait too long and you're still pressing on hard under the bottom, you'll get a bit of a fat bottom, and that's not what we're aiming for in calligraphy. So the descending stem loop, so this is for the G's and the J's and the goodness knows whatever else, G's and J's and P's and Y's and the Z a little bit as well. The Z's slightly different, but similar idea. So nice and straight, ease off before we get to the bottom, and round the corner and end diagonally. And what you should find is if you were to turn your paper up the opposite way, you should find that your ascending stem loops and descending stem loops should look the same. So that's a lesson in consistency. The closer they are to being the same, the better your consistency is. Okay. So make sure that you're easing off as you get to the bottom. If you ease off too quickly here, you'll have a bit of a very quick transition from thick to thin, and it just won't glide as nicely. So that's what I mean. If you go too quickly, you end up with this kind of situation. So just make sure that you're easing off before you get around the corner, instead of easing off all of a sudden. Okay, and that just makes it all nice and gradual. Okay, now we've got the reverse descending stem loop, which is used for the F's and the Q's. So this one isn't used as often, which sometimes means that you've got to practice it a little bit more when you come across F's and Q's at the start. But the same idea, but it's, yeah, just facing the other way. There we go. So just remember, nice and slowly. Calligraphy, learning calligraphy is meant to be, well, it's not meant to be, but it is possibly the most therapeutic thing I've ever done. So, you know, treat it as that. You're not going to be perfect to start with, and your first set of basic strokes might be a little bit wibbly here or there. But hey, that's okay, because it's your rules. You do it at your pace, and do it in a way that you enjoy it. If you find yourself getting a bit stressed about it, tell me. You can always be in contact with me, or you can ask people in the group. Ask people in the group why something might not be going very well, or ask me why your nib's not quite doing what you want it to do. That's absolutely fine. I don't mind answering any time, apart from the middle of the night maybe. Anyway, so we're going to go on to the last one now. So we're on the letter O now. So all the way up and over and round. Now the temptation with this one, so we've got the easing off along here. This is all very gentle, but sometimes people don't go quite over enough to the left with that final loop. And what then happens is it starts to look a bit like a U or a V. And that's not what we're looking for. It stops it from being legible. And actually, you know, artistic is one thing, but legibility is the priority when it comes to calligraphy, because you're writing words. So yeah, so just bear that in mind as you're going along. So pressing down hard to start with, press down a bit too hard there, all the way over and back round again. And then over time you might change the way these basic strokes look and change the way that your letters look, but to start with we're going to go for a nice sort of basic set of basic strokes. And there you have it. So now that you have done all of those, you have created all of the different basic strokes that you need to create your modern calligraphy alphabet. So now that you've got these, you should be able to do absolutely anything. So the next session we will start putting these basic strokes into letters, and then you will start to feel it all coming together. So well done, keep it up, do a little bit of practice here or there before you do the next module, and I look forward to seeing you in module 2.